Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining this session. I'm Anshul Garg, Product Marketing Manager with IBM Security. And today we are very pleased to host our first Open Cybersecurity Alliance Community Forum. So as you may know, Open Cybersecurity Alliance is comprised of global like-minded security vendors, end users, and individuals who are interested in fostering an open cybersecurity ecosystem, where products from all vendors can work together without developing custom integrations, so that reduces some of the complexity for our clients. Now, to make this a reality, we've been making great leaps from an Open Cybersecurity Alliance perspective, and I would urge you to check out our webpage and a YouTube channel for the progress that we've made. We've recorded some webinars that you could leverage. In addition to running those webinars, we wanted to try out a new format. We wanted to engage the cybersecurity community, yourselves, and a couple of other stakeholders on various topics. This is a new approach that we are piloting, and depending on how these goes and the participation we get from the industry, we plan to do a lot more of these. So for the session today, we are tackling the topic of indicators of behavior, and I'm very excited to have on the panel today a very esteemed set of panelists in Jason Keirstead, who is with IBM Security CTO Office and a co-chair of Open Cybersecurity Alliance, and Lodrina Cherne, who's the principal security advocate with Cybereason. We also have with us Sam Curry, who is the CISO and Chief Product Officer at Cybereason. So we've got a very good set of panelists today. And what we intend to do is we want to introduce this topic, talk about indicators of behavior, and we have around 20 minutes of planned content that we intend to talk through. But essentially that content is just as a fodder for us to engage. So we are looking forward to having this interactive conversation. Feel free to send any questions in the chat window here. We will keep monitoring it. If you have other comments, please feel free to post in chat. But the idea is to have this engaging conversation. So thank you again for joining. And with that, Jason, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Anshul. Thanks for the great introduction. So thank you everyone very much for taking a couple of minutes to join us here today. I think this is going to be a very interesting and exciting discussion. And we really want to make this an open discussion. So this is not going to be an hour of us presenting thoughts to you. It's going to be very much the idea is to engage in an open dialogue with the community about these open questions that we have around indicators of behavior. So we're going to start off with some foundational ideas of what an IoB is, what we think of it, what we think it is, and how we in the Open Cybersecurity Alliance might want to work with IoBs and leverage them for the future. And then basically, once we've gone through that material, really open it up for discussion and hopefully have some engaging discussion with you, the other members of the community. So the rough format of this is, as Lodrina and Sam and myself are presenting, if you have any thoughts, questions that you want to have on this topic, I encourage you to utilize the Slack, or sorry, not Slack, the WebEx chat function to engage amongst yourselves and ask us questions as well. Anshul, who just introduced us, is going to be monitoring that chat and grabbing pertinent questions that we can then come to once we've gone through the brief introductory material. And then really, and I'll anyone who does post a question, the idea is I'll unmute you and we'll start some real open dialogue here. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lodrina and Sam, who are going to dive into the topic in a little bit more detail. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Anshul, for kicking things off for us. I want to start with some foundational ideas and just level set with basic terminology, so we're all on the same page here, which is, I think many of us are used to working with IOCs, with indicators of compromise, things like hashes, things like IPs, and with credit to David Bianco and his work with the pyramid of pain, these are things that our industry is swimming in. They're fairly trivial. They're I think depending on who you talk to, easy to get. We certainly can do better with IOCs as an industry where they're hosted among different sources and different formats. But what we're hoping to do with today's conversation is help us as an industry move towards something that can help us become smarter, become more efficient, and really move towards addressing the tip of the pyramid of pain. And that is TTPs, our tactics, techniques, and procedures, particularly of advanced adversaries, something that we commonly talk about in the MITRE attack matrix. And as we move up the pyramid of pain from those standard IOCs and IP addresses to these TTPs, we think as an industry, it's a lot tougher to share what those TTP are, to share the behavior that we're seeing across our most advanced adversaries. This is what today's conversation is all about. How can we as an industry talk about indicators of behavior, talk about sequences of events that indicate something bad is happening? And let me set this up with a very recent example from earlier this year. When SolarWinds first came onto the scene, I think it's a very recent example of how using IOCs to determine bad is a really hard thing to do. We saw attackers in SolarWinds that were rolling unique deliverables and unique executables for every system that they were able to infect. So even the idea of sharing IOCs, sharing hashes, is something that really wasn't effective in that example. What is effective, we believe, and we've been having this conversation internally at Cybereason and are here today to open it up to everybody here. What we believe, what is important when we look back at an attack like SolarWinds is to see the sequence of events, to see a certification or authentication to a system that doesn't have all of the noise that a normal authentication should have, followed by a down period or fallow period of no attacker or no unusual activity, and then seeing a pattern of executables being deployed, and then seeing a pattern of lateral movement. So again, it's not the mere existence of one suspicious logon, one particular hash, or one particular event. It's really a sequence of things that happens. And this is some of what we see as the power of indicators of behavior. Let's take it back to Locard's principle. Locard's principle is the idea that every action leaves some kind of trace. And my background is in forensics. I've spent a decade doing that at a very low level. So the idea that every action is recorded at some level is really key to this. And it's the aggregation of these bad actions that we want to talk about. Sam, what do you want to add here?
Yeah, I think you covered it really well. I would only add that as you move up this pyramid of pain, it gets progressively more difficult to find the artifacts and more difficult to share and to find the telemetry that could help us. In your case with SolarWinds, the behaviors were happening, and with the right magnifying glass and the right way of describing them could have been shared even absent IOCs. So we put some definitions on this slide for IOCs. What are they? And indicators of attack, which is another term used, but it doesn't really have a standard definition quite like IOCs does in David Bianco's pyramid. But also things like hunting tools, I think, are really important. They're used currently to share complex expressions. They were done actually in the SolarWinds case. People started to put out what are the YARA rules to find this stuff. But it does depend on some form of instrumentation. Locard's principle says, pick up all the evidence and sort through it. But in a digital scene, it's extremely busy and it's extremely difficult to find the signal and the noise. So we listed some problems, right? The noise to signal ratio is 1. It's hard to get to the top of the pyramid. Finding new things that have never been seen before is difficult. And especially when you have, I would say, changing or unique indicators of compromise. What is it if a hash is only seen once, and when the attacker actually might even use them against us by dropping them on by dropping a unique build on a system with a unique hash, and as soon as you take that and check it against a public repository or somebody else looks for it somewhere else, they become aware that you're onto them because it only really was deployed on that one system. So the mission here is to get richer data, and we'll go into the next slide in a minute, that lower signal to noise, able to get ahead of not having the lower stuff in this pyramid and to get to the more advanced attacks. Lodrina, that's all I would add here, and I think we can move on to the next slide unless you have any final comments on it.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to acknowledge that when we're talking about an attacker might leverage a known IOC, drop that on another system as a red herring, I really want to acknowledge we are talking about addressing the tip of the pyramid, those really advanced attacks. But also, I want to point out that by thinking about these advanced cases, which is where we're hoping to advance the conversation, a lot of our everyday work will be helped by this kind of attack. So we suggest that with an IoB, we look at all kinds of telemetry data. We can look at endpoint data, we can look at network, we can look at identity. But it's really that sequence I talked about in SolarWinds, this type of authentication, plus this type of maybe fallow period, this type of executable, along with this maybe lateral movement indicator. It's this sequence of events. I think a lot of us are used to talking about this in the sense of the MITRE framework, but we're thinking about a language to standardize and discuss and share. This is key. We're hoping to share across the industry a way to talk about these sequences. So it's nothing that we have, a specific Cybereason format for. We really want it to be vendor neutral. That's part of bringing our conversation here. And we're hoping that this is something that evolves from the TTPs we already talk about and puts them into a language that can help us find more of those advanced threats. Sam, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so I do want to stress this isn't, I've seen some memes where people say, behavioral detection is really another form of signature, and it's not. So we're not talking about behavioral detections. We're not talking about anomalies or correlations. Those are things that people would do downstream. What we're talking about is a new telemetry type. So what we're looking for is to describe behaviors, things like process spawns a process, the touch of a file, the touch of a registry or change of a registry entry, network communication, successful login. If you look at the low cards principle side of things, it's, and I use SIM, I use it for so many functions, but things like 6 failed logins matters because of a policy. This is successful login. That's an action. It's a behavior. Now, what else happened, right? So what we want is the map of behaviors. So it has some implications that we might have to start recording some different things than we've recorded historically, not give those up, but new things to record behaviorally, and ways of describing chains. And if I pull something out, the sub-bullets under this is most useful as an interoperable description language and can be used to share queries. I want to be able to say, where do I see A and B near C type things? Or, using MITRE attack techniques, where am I seeing candidates for techniques? And when they form sequences, this becomes interesting. So it's this chains and sequencing idea. And to stress again that this should be vendor neutral. And in fact, it's also recording type neutral. It can be done by endpoint products. It can be done by cloud products. It can be done by identity products. It can be done by network products. What we're saying is, let's catch this new type of telemetry that we're going to call a behavior, good or bad, and then let's describe together how we would share interesting sequences and chains back and forth. So we do have an example on the next slide, and Lodrina, we should probably go there next, unless you have something else to add here.
Yeah, let's go here. Actually, Sam, I'll let you keep going here.
Sure. So So the example that comes to mind is any of these things could be benign or almost benign, but they could all be candidates. The list on the left, loading a DLL, making a call out. I put DGA because I was actually thinking of SolarWinds when we did this, but if there's a domain generation algorithm in use, that probably isn't if you can identify it. But again, just calling out from an environment, pulling a file in, changes to privilege, lateral communication, those sorts of things. But if that happened as a sequence, I don't know an investigator who wouldn't be interested in it, right? That particular chain is interesting in and of itself, even if each piece could be benign. So rather than say, I've got to identify one of these 5 steps represented by those bullets, what we say is the sequence is interesting. So recording the behavior and then being able to describe which sequences are generally or specifically indicative of things to be hunting and candidates for triage and investigation is interesting. So some takeaways is, I think the IOC way of doing things that would identify something bad here and then trying to figure out what happened before and after if it does that. But the indicator of behavior way would find the story as a chain, all right? And so that's what we're trying to elicit here. And I think following the SolarWinds announcement, when that happened and everybody was hungry and said, tell me what to look for, the answer wasn't, oh, these IOCs. It could as easily been, oh, this IoB until we have IOCs, right? This will give you the right candidates to investigate, give you things to look for. And it might have even found things prior to it being known that this was even an attack happening, like the attack against SolarWinds. So, Lodrina, anything you'd add here?
I just want to really simplify and stress that we're talking about the story here. And when you after our discussion today, leave this session and report back to your colleagues about what was it we talked about in this OCA IoB meeting, is we want a way to tell story, in a way that is consistent, shared between different companies, different organizations. What is the language that we could develop of a way to tell this story and share it with each other in a standardized, efficient way? So with that, let me turn it over to Jason here for our discussions. And I hope folks have been using the chat function. If you have questions and you haven't already entered them into the chat, please do, because we have plenty of time in this session to talk about them.
Yeah, thanks, Lodrina. And there has been a couple of interesting points we'll definitely be getting to in a second. I just, wanted to take a few seconds to chime in as well. This whole idea of basically shifting more to the left and modeling the behavior of the adversary. It's something that I think we as an IBM Security have been looking at for a while, but also I definitely think that right now is the time that the industry is really starting to move very quickly in this direction. So I think this topic is very pertinent to a lot of different folks, which is why I was excited to talk about it today. So we've got some kind of lead discussion questions here to get people's gears moving in their head. And this is I sent these out with the initial call invite for this event. So hopefully people have been thinking about them. But basically, now that we've kind of level set on what we mean for an indicator of behavior, what do we all agree, first of all, that indicators of behavior are distinct and separate and sort of an important use case from an IOC? What are we missing here? What's missing in what we just described around what an IOB is? And if we assume that these things are distinct and important, so I'm kind of jumping to that now, how should security practitioners use these? And more importantly, how would we as an industry exchange them? If so, how would that work? Lodrina talked about a vendor neutral language. I'll also say, it could be using an existing language as well, like STIX, but I also keep it like STIX is very much designed currently to communicate what in my opinion, it's targeted a lot more towards IOC behaviors, although you can model attack threat actor behaviors in it as well, but I don't see it being used that way very much in the wild yet. So question there, are there things missing from STIX that need to be added in order to solve for this use case? What is the barrier? Is it just a vendor adoption, or are there structural things that the OCA could suggest to or work on to add here to solve this use case? So that's really the discussion. And at this point, you know, I'll call on Anshul just to see. I know there was a couple of interesting things spewing up in the chat there. Is there something of note we should jump to first?
Yeah, thank you for walking through this. I think this is a great conversation that you've kickstarted, and the way that IoBs were presented. I think there are some interesting conversations that are happening in the chat. I think one comment from Sergey for IoBs, it seems it can be covered with STIX to graph, listing indicators, detection rules, TTPs.
Sergey, I'm going to unmute you. If you want to jump in and talk about that directly, or
sure. I was thinking that since STIX already has big parts in place, right? It's possible to describe high-level activity like actors, campaigns, etc. And you can go lower on the TTPs and even lower on indicators, which are in STIX2 are more than IOCs. They are patch detection patterns, right? And even lower to observe data. So it seems like all the components on different layers are there. And the matter of describing behavior is to tying them in the like a proper graph, and maybe requiring specific types of entities to be present, and requiring specific fields to be present, those entities, so that we can I don't know, reconstruct the timeline or reconstruct the sequence, etc.
So you think it might be possible with the current data structures, and what would be needed are guidelines or some type of a procedure and recommended schema about how to use those to model this specific type of data. Is that what you're saying? Oh, you got muted again. Sorry.
Apologies.
No.
Yes, it seems like the detection content rules, for example, Sigma, can cover like low-level detections. So it's not IOCs, it's one step higher with detecting behavior or some activity, right? Or simple behaviors on the system level, or maybe on the network level. And then we're taking a step up from that on the high-level abstractions and going into how we tie those together. Like if I see some activity on one endpoint and then another activity on another endpoint, how do I connect those two detections to describe the picture? So it seems like STIX can allow us to express this and connect seamlessly with higher constructs like campaign or tools, techniques,
Sergey?
or even to the actor. Yes.
Yeah, this is Sam speaking. I think there's two ideas to unpeel here, right? One is this notion of a description language, and we did have a pseudocode example we can share in a moment, where you essentially describe first and second order Boolean logic of how these things are connected. The other one is what you might do based on the data structure you put it in. Like you kind of hinted at, if this was in a graph structure, then what you could do with it as a lab kind of thing. And so you might look across a company and say, well, if something's blinking over here and, you know, and something, you know, out of a company of 10,000 people, there's another thing blinking over there, how would you then do the math around connecting those things? And I think that those are two different things, right? One is very much local, and the other one is at a macro level. I could be off on that. Does that fit with what you're saying?
I think so. I think the first point is, how do you take all those different conditions, let's call them conditions, like detection rules that can fire up, right? And how do you combine them in the bigger logical constructs? Like I've seen this and that in 5 minutes I saw that. I think sticks to patterns try to do that to some level, but it's still quite difficult. And if you want to use other detection rules like Sigma, then there is no standard that allows you to chain those together in a good construct.
This actually, that notion that you just said that made, Lodrina, can you show the slide we decided to hide, but maybe, yeah. So Sergey, this example from a pseudocode perspective, if you read through it, you see there's a couple of levels of logic that's saying if these things happen together, right? There's notion of a command line and a listener, and then at the same time there's the launch of cmd.exe, and there's a parent-child process with some other behaviors. That's a description of like that's a query usable thing you could ask if you had the right classes of telemetry. Is that what you're thinking?
Indeed, yes, indeed. And I think this can be even expressed in sticks too, right? If you present these conditions or detection rules, like MD5 hash you have there or command line, as the indicator with the type Sigma, and then you use custom relationships to tie those together, maybe.
So and this one might be a bad example because we were trying to be IOC free in our conversation, and lo and behold, there's a signature. But yeah.
Okay. No, but that's okay. IC is like a primitive detection rule, right? The most primitive there can be. Yeah. I'm not saying that Sticks2 might be the best vehicle for that, but I think it might be possible to do it.
I'm going to hand the microphone for a second to Keith if he wants to chime in, because he had a comment on whether or not we're jumping to a solution instead of defining the problem.
Hey, this is Keith. How you doing?
Hi, Keith.
Yeah, that's the systems engineer in me. It's I bristle a little bit at jumping right into solutions without clarifying the problem, because it's, you know, a brilliant solution to the wrong problem doesn't do a whole lot of good. And so, I mean, I think you're on to the problem. Yes, including IoBs, I think are important. And so now the question becomes, what would we use them for? Which would then kind of point us in the right direction for how to get them, the structure that they would take, the content that they would take, the metadata that they would have, whether it's machine to machine for IoBs, whether it's machine to person, person to person, and so on. Because I can see these being necessary to digest these in a machine to machine basis. And so do they take the form of, say, signatures, where they're looking for discrete patterns of behavior? Or do they take the form of foundation from which you train artificial intelligence and then start using it that way? Or is the answer yes to all of that, which it very well could be? Somewhere in the solution, I think, is the concept of patterns, because that's really what we're looking for here. It's some representation of recurrent themes. You know, before it was just indicators of stuff, and now this is indicators of behavior. And so there's various types of patterns out there, design patterns being the typical that capture and reuse development knowledge. There was something I was working on in my PhD research, which are decision patterns. And decision patterns capture and reuse operational knowledge. And so in a sense there, if you were to superimpose some concept of behavior, which one example I posted out there is from Gary Jackson's book in 2012, in predicting malicious behavior. It's a very good start. His book is a very good start towards what you're talking about here, where he took years and years of clinical psychology experience and transferred framework that was very useful in that context to the cyberspace context. And I'll stop there because I could go on and talk. Thanks.
No, thanks for that, Keith. And the links that'll go in the chat, so that this is all being recorded, so we'll make sure to extract those out and send a summary. Sam, did you have any thoughts on that, or?
No, I super appreciated the comments. I mean, yes, we should be clear, I think, if and when we do work here about what it is we're trying to solve and the cases. And I like the distinction between machine to machine and human to human, but also the use of the precedent material. I actually saw it in the chat earlier around psychology. Yeah, thank you for the comments. I think they're spot on.
I'm getting a comment here from Danielle. Just let me unmute her. Hi, Danielle.
Hey, how are you?
Great.
Fantastic. Okay, so I work with Sam and Lodrina at Cybereason, and I wanted to kind of try to put some structure and framework for just food for thought as we go forward around the nature of the problem. I think we all agree that indicators of behavior, behavioral patterns, I think are important. That they need to be identified, and we need a way to share that information, because we've long since passed the concept of IOCs being effective. I think what we need to we want to drill down on, and sticks might be an answer, I don't know. And I think the idea that jumping to an answer is probably or not jumping to an answer is probably appropriate. What I would say, though, is what I would think we would want to focus on as cybersecurity professionals is constructing something that is technology agnostic, that allows us to construct and share specific indicators of behavior, either broad behaviors or very granular TTPs, whichever the case may be, where it's most effective. And that leads us to a couple of things. One of them, obviously, is the ability to share observables we see that just can't be shared effectively in other ways. The other piece is it helps us, if we share effectively, it helps us drive into things like false positive reduction in using a group perspective rather than each of us individually trying to do it on our own. So I think if we're going to focus, I think those are some things that we might want to look at.
Thanks, Danielle. And I'd agree. Yeah, I do. I don't think necessarily that we're saying that that we have to use sticks or that it's the solution. I think that Sergey was just saying that so we have to do some diligence, but if it is possible to model this using an already existing standard like sticks, it'll just make everyone's lives so much easier. And it very much aligns with kind of what we're doing with OCA. So it's like, we're not sure yet, but this may be a direction to look at, is the way that I'm reading the comments. And I'm getting some messages from folks, by the way, that apparently for some reason that I'm not totally sure, some people can't message the public group, and they can only message me. And I'm not totally sure why that is, because some other people definitely are able to message everyone. So if your send to link in the WebEx does not let you select everyone, there should be a drop down where you can change it to everyone. If you can't do that, I'm not sure. We'll have to investigate for the next time. I apologize, but feel free to send me your message, and I'll relay whenever appropriate. I did see there was another comment I wanted to unmute on the mic, and that was Charles Frick. Charles, are you still here? Yes, I can see you. I'm just going to unmute you for a second. You had a comment about the Adversary Playbook from Unit 42. I'm not sure if you wanted to go into any more details about that or not, on how they're leveraging sticks to communicate this kind of information.
Hi, everybody. I was just saying that we've been over here at my work at APL, we've been playing with some similar ideas, and Unit 42's has these Sticks 2.1 bundles they call Adversary Playbooks that we found the structure there works really well with translating it to a graph, but also works really well for adding these type of IoB style objects that you can combine in there, and then work with things like detection analytics, and leaves the possibility for things like response objects. So I was just throwing it out there. If folks weren't familiar with that one, that's a nice one to look at as well for how to do this. Not trying to jump straight into solution engineering here, but saying that it's a existing standards compliant construct that I think works really well with the points you guys are outlining in this talk.
No, definitely. I was aware of Unit 42's work, and I knew they were using sticks. I haven't totally been keeping up to date, to be completely honest. I'm not sure how far they've gotten down this path of this modeling behavior. So that would be great. I think we should definitely all go take a look at that.
Yeah, not saying they haven't, they're publishing them directly as part of it right now, but I know when we've been playing with it, we found that to be one of the easiest ways to fold a behavior pattern like this, is kind of adding it into that type of graph.
Yeah. I'm just trying to go through the comments here, and who I haven't hit the mic off to yet. Ryan, I'm not sure if I gave you the mic yet. I know you had a number of different comments here about making sure we capture the full enterprise context. Let me unmute you here.
Okay.
Hi, Ryan.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was just going to comment. I'm a big advocate of sticks too, so I'm not trying to jump to solution. In fact, it's a little premature to do that. But the enterprise context is extremely important because individuals' behaviors are interpreted within that context. So expressing the richness of the policies and the environment of the environment in which an insider is functioning, that's what makes an insider stick out. It's a very difficult task to do, but richness in describing the enterprise context is incredibly important. I know that from my own experience that extensions to sticks to accommodate that will need to be in our future. We're certainly trying to do that in terms of richly describing adversaries at this point, but describing the actual enterprise context is extremely important. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, and so first of all, I couldn't agree more. It's very interesting that you're bringing this up. So as you know, this is the first of these Open Cybersecurity Alliance community, trying to call it community forum, where we have these kinds of open discussions about things that we need to look at. And this subject around, so I've been calling it more modeling asset information, but it is very much the enterprise context. So modeling the local enterprise context appropriately. That was I had thought that we would want to run that discussion as a follow-up to this in the coming months, either next month or the month after, because it's something that we're actively looking at IBM, and we're also looking at in the CTITC. There's a group looking at it there. So there's a number of different people who are interested in this idea of modeling the enterprise context and linking it in sticks. So yeah, I couldn't agree more how important that'll be for this whole IoB conversation. Sam, Lodrina, do you guys have any comments on that as well? Have you been thinking about like how this is related to the local asset inventory and policy information?
Yeah, I think, Ryan, thank you so much for bringing that up. I'll just second couldn't agree more. You know, you're giving us one other aspect of the context that we're saying is so important and just didn't happen to capture so far. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's how Keith got excited about context as well. I'll just echo Lodrina here and say, yeah, I think that's spot on. But I do want to be careful that we don't, not only that we don't leap to a solution, but that we don't aim too big. Like, I think I've heard two different mentions of, hey, this works really well in a graph when you populate it that way. And I don't think what we're trying to do is architect what the next gen of any particular generation of technology is, but rather telemetry type that should be instrumented, that has utility. And in particular, we're suggesting a query language and a description language but I could see it going in any number of directions as a result of this conversation or a working group here. And even if we wind up saying, hey, you know what, this is a new class of data and a new way of doing things within STIX 2 or something like that. But I think we've highlighted here that this stuff is important. And yeah, I love the notion of context and how things relate and tying this to things like an asset inventory. I can see many ways that all this stuff could be tied together to add more value.
And Ryan, I see you still got your hand up. I'm not sure if that's an artifact or so. I'm trying to unmute you here again. If you had a follow up.
No, I don't have a follow-up. I just don't know how to lower my hand.
That's okay. No worries. I'm not sure. I think you just click it. But here, I lowered it for you. Oh, you lowered it again.
I just found it and raised it again, so I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I think that was a very good segue, Sam. I don't know if you did it on purpose, but it's a good segue to, what we wanted to wrap up. If we can go on to the next slide. Basically, what's the fault? We wanted to talk about what our actions are after this call, right? So, should we try to set up? It seems like there's definite interest in this. Part of the impetus for this forum was to try to figure out, should we set up some type of a working group under the OCA for this specific problem area, where we can start fleshing out these ideas. And I'm not sure, Sam, if you wanted to speak about that for a second, but that's really the goal here. And if you're interested in participating in these conversations going forward, Anshul mentioned you can paste your email here and we can add you ourselves, or you can also just go and subscribe to the various mailing lists of the OCA, where we'll be posting information about those working groups. So Sam, do you want to?
No, I think you said it right. Lodrina, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think we'd be just most interested in seeing who wants to continue this conversation with us and see where we can take it, because the things that have been raised so far today are great feedback and I think can help us make this successful.
This is precisely the kind of conversation that we want. And I think if we can get a broad base of support and ideas, I think this will end in one of three ways, right? Either we'll create something new, or we'll figure out how to augment something that's existing, or we'll decide it's not needed. And I'm okay with all three of those, but I think the conversation could really be rich and quite exciting for all the problems we stated earlier.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I see some folks putting their email, which is amazing. By the way, you don't have to send that to the whole group. You can just send it to myself or whatever as well. Or you can subscribe yourself if you're not comfortable with that as well. The mailing lists are public to subscribe to. So did anyone have any other comments or interesting thoughts around this line of thinking about IoBs they want to share today? I'll just say that, we'll definitely be participating in it from the IBM security point of view. As I mentioned earlier on, we're very interested in moving this whole, to me, this is all about shifting left and really modeling the adversary behavior and being able to get to this point where we can express things in terms of chains of TTPs and elevating risk based on the progression up that chain, as opposed to these atomic indicators. All right, I haven't seen any other comments. Don't see any other hand raised. So do you have any closing thoughts, Sam, Lodrina?
Yeah, I'll just say, look, I actually, we didn't say it much, but I liked your final comment there about moving things to the left. Like we want to catch these things sooner, more completely, and we want to have people able to take action and find things before there's IOCs. And I think we want them to be able to find the signal for the noise better. And I think that demands a new generation of telemetry and context and querying and analysis. And so hopefully we get there. And I think this is one of the key ingredients to be able to do so. Lodrina?
Yeah, I think, it's really important to have these forward-looking conversations in general. I appreciate that so many of you have taken some time away from the daily grind to think about this, because I think the way that we get better is really by thinking about what a good future would look like. And this is what I'm so excited by. So thank you.
We did get one last comment here from Paul from TrueStar. Paul, did you want to chime in about
Sure.
this?
Real quick, we don't necessarily have to invent this all ourselves. We could look out into other fields that are look at sequencing of problems or understanding behavior. A few fields come to mind. Health. Early indicators of what might be a problem and sequencing of that for major diseases, and how medical professionals look at that, or counterterrorism. I spend a lot of time on counterterrorism, look at early indicators of problematic behavior, and how do you sequence and pull together and fuse that data. And similarly in weapons mass destruction, non-proliferation, how we see indicators of behavior that might yield problems or help us uncover problems as they're kind of unfolding. So, and I'm a part of another group at the Harvard Kennedy School that is looking at the NTSB model for the National Transportation Safety Board, that is looking at this problem from a different point of view of how do you kind of examine past events and learn from them for the broader context. This is OCA's work is totally different, but they have turned to others not involved in cybersecurity to try to learn more.
That's
Yeah,
really
thank you, Paul.
interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lodrina. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, just saying thank you, Paul. And by the way, you might not know this, but you're talking, at least on the Cybereason side, a few of us who are big history buffs. So looking back at previous events, whether we're talking near term, but especially longer term, and very broadly at other fields. Personally, the idea of what David Epstein wrote about in Range comes to mind. Learning from other fields and applying that knowledge across domains, I find very compelling. So yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Okay, I think this has been an amazing discussion today, to be honest. I think this was great. I'm very glad we did this. But I've seen things basically dry up a little bit in the chat. So I want to thank Lodrina and Sam Curry for taking a few moments to talk to us about this problem area. Anshul, did you have anything before we wrap today? You wanted to comment, or?
No, I think this was great. Thank you, JK. Thank you, Lodrina. Thank you, Sam, for all the insightful insights here, and thank you essentially to all the folks who've dialed in. Like, this conversation was really great. It was really collaborative, and in true spirit, some of the things that we want to accomplish through OCA, getting more of these conversations. So yeah, given the great response that we had on this call, we had like 15-20-minute content prepared, and this ran for about 50 minutes or so. So we look to host more of these. We look to having you on those and sharing your industry insights and perspectives. And one thing that I would urge you to do is, if you're not aware, just check out Open Cybersecurity Alliance website, and you'll find ways to engage with us there. But thank you for making the time today for this discussion.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and look forward to future conversations on this. And if, as we mentioned, if you're interested, just go to our website and subscribe to the mailing list and join our Slack channel. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.